Yeah, it's
And we'll start. So good afternoon. I hope the weather is a little better in your neck of the woods. I was in the Berkshires this weekend, and we got nice weather and we got pouring weather. It's been raining on and off today, and we might have some rain as I'm speaking. So I hope the weather is a little better in your area. And it's hot and it is muggy when the sun comes out. My name is Evan Weiner. I've been a journalist since I'm 15 years old, starting in 1971. So in this picture, I'm interviewing Phil Simms, the New York Giants quarterback. It's 1983, and that's the year we're looking at, 1983, the events of that year. Ronald Reagan gave the Evil Empire speech. There was the Star Wars stuff, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars rather. The plane, the KLM 007, shot down by the Soviets. False alarms, U.S. nukes and the USSR, and the two times that the world came very close to seeing a nuclear attack in 1983, and you probably don't even remember that. There were problems in Lebanon, the Beirut barracks bombing, and again another nuclear conflict averted. And Grenada was invaded in 1983, and that is welcome to Grenada, because I speak on cruise ships, and it's one of the stops I made. The only time I was there, but I got a rather interesting story when I was there. There was the Iran-Iraq War, and that is Donald Rumsfeld glad handing Saddam Hussein back in 1983. Margaret Thatcher wins very big in England. She came back from the dead, literally. Sally takes a ride, Sally Ride, and Bluford blasts off. And the Cabbage Patch Kids. I don't know if any of you were online trying to get Cabbage Patch Kids, or if you got into any fistfights over the availability of Cabbage Patch Kids, but that was a big deal back then. Oh, Mario Brothers, that's still around. Mario Brothers video game came out. And the United States Football League, which included a team in Boston, the Boston Breakers. The Boston Breakers failed. Randy Vataha was the owner, who used to be the wide receiver for Jim Plunkett, both at Stanford and also with the Patriots. And he went with the franchise. He's part owner. He went with the franchise to New Orleans, and the franchise ended up in Portland, Oregon, and the league went out of business. But we'll start with the Evil Empire speech. You're up in the Boston area, and I take it you don't particularly like the New York Yankees. And I think somebody from Boston once referred to the New York Yankees as the Evil Empire. But this is a little different. The Evil Empire speech was given to the National Association of Evangelicals in Orlando, Florida, and he attacked the Soviet Union. Reagan was trying to make a case for deploying NATO nuclear-armed intermediate-range ballistic missiles in Western Europe as a response to the Soviets installing new nuclear-armed missiles in Eastern Europe. And this is what Reagan said, and it is part of the Evil Empire speech. Yes, let us pray for the salvation of all of those who live in that totalitarian darkness. Pray that they will discover the joy of knowing God. But until they do, let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, they are the focus of evil in the modern world. And there is Reagan, and he may have told a joke here or there. I met Reagan in 1980. I was a young guy. I was 23 years old. I was working for WNEW in New York, a radio station that appealed to older people. They played Sinatra and Tony Bennett and Nat King Cole. Didn't appeal to me then, appeals to me now. And I spent about a half hour with Reagan in January of 1980. And he looked at me and says, "You are 23 years old. You have your whole world ahead of you. I want to help." The speech goes on. "So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to Beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil. Well, he's labeled the Soviets as the evil empire. And now comes another thing that's aimed against the Soviets, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Ronald Reagan proposes that on March 23rd. He asked scientists who gave us nuclear weapons. Oppenheimer is out now, so that's who he's referring to way back when, in the 40s, who gave us nuclear weapons to turn their great talents to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. The proposed defense system was a highly advanced system that would rely on technology that had not yet been developed to intercept and prevent a nuclear missile attack on the US by the Soviet Union. It's called Star Wars, after that movie, Star Wars. And there is Reagan on the cover of Time magazine, defending defense, budget battles in Star Wars. Well, Ted Kennedy, the senator from your neck of the woods, referred to Reagan's proposal as reckless Star Wars schemes, despite criticisms from politicians, many scientists, and others that the SDI was impractical, expensive, and dangerous. The concept was developed sort of, a little bit, eventually. That is Samantha Smith. And Samantha Smith wants to know why we can't get along. It's July 7th, and the American schoolgirl and peace advocate Samantha Smith visits the Soviet Union. She was invited there by Yuri Andropov, who took over from Leonid Brezhnev after writing him a letter about her concerns over nuclear war. This is the letter. Dear Mr. Andropov, my name is Samantha Smith. I'm 10 years old. Congratulations on your new job. I've been worrying about Russia and the United States getting into a nuclear war. Are you going to vote to have a war or not? If you aren't, please tell me how you're going to help to not have a war. This question, you do not have to answer, but I would like if you would. Why do you want to conquer the world, or at least our country? God made the world for us to share and take care of, not to fight over or have one group of people own it all. Please, let's do whatever he wanted and have everybody be happy too. Sincerely, Samantha Smith. Well, it's not a nice world out there. And this is an airline that's shot down, KLM 007, shot down by the Soviets. It's September 1st, 1983. Korean Airlines, or KLA Flight 007, and obviously they had a relationship with KLM, was on the last leg of a flight from New York City to Seoul with a stopover in Anchorage, Alaska. As it approached its final destination, the plane began to veer off its normal course. In a short time, the plane flew into Russia airspace, across the peninsula, where some top secret Soviet military installations were known to be located. The Soviets sent 2 fighters to intercept the plane. And this is the plane, or it isn't the plane, but a prototype of the plane that was shot down by the Soviets. According to tapes of the conversations between the fighter pilots and Soviet ground control, the fighters quickly located the KAL flight and tried to make contact with the passenger jet. Failing to receive a response, one of the fighters fired a heat-seeking missile. KAL 007 was hit, plummeted into the Sea of Japan. All 269 people on board were killed. And that's some of the personal belongings of the people who were on the plane that was put in a plastic bag. The U.S. Department of State suggested that the Soviets knew the plane was an unarmed civilian passenger aircraft. President Ronald Reagan called the incident a massacre and issued a statement in which he declared that the Soviets had turned against the world and the moral precepts which guide human relations among people everywhere. Reagan announced on September 16th that this thing here, or part of this thing here, because you got it in your phone, global positioning system, the global positioning system, would be made available for civilian use free of charge once completed in order to avert similar navigational errors in the future. Well, this guy's a hero, and you probably have never heard of him. And he made a decision that may have saved a lot of lives, including you and me. Colonel Stanislav Petrov makes a decision. It is September 27th. A Soviet early warning station had received signals that five, see, you hear the sirens, right? I brought that in on cue, the sirens for this. On September 27th, a Soviet early warning station had received signals that 5 incoming Minutemen intercontinental missiles had been launched from American bases. The duty officer, Colonel Stanislav Petrov, made a split-second gut decision that proved to be correct. He concluded that a satellite glitch had triggered a false alarm. He later explained it was a gut decision, which was basically 50-50 guess based on his distrust of an early warning system and the relative paucity of missiles that were launched. Well, in Lebanon, there's a problem. I actually experienced firsthand, I wasn't in Lebanon, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, I was working for CBS Radio News, and I was assigned to interview a guy by the name of Terry Waite, who was the ambassador for the Archbishop of Canterbury for Lebanon, or to Lebanon. And he was held captive for years and years and years. He was 6'9". That's why I remember most about him. And I said, how'd your captors treat you? And he said, the captors were okay. They realized I was a little tall, but they really didn't bother me all that much. But he was a lucky one. On October 23rd, a terrorist bombing attack against U.S. and French armed forces on barracks in Beirut claimed 299 lives. The attacks, which took place amid the sectarian conflict of the extremely damaging Lebanese civil war. A multinational peacekeeping force composed of troops from the United States, France, and Italy arrived in Lebanon in August 1982 as part of a ceasefire arrangement signed by Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the Palestine Liberation Organization. So this is just another chapter in the Middle East history since, well, you go back to the Arab Revolt back around 1936, and then, of course, all the wars from 1948. On April 18th, a car bomb destroyed the U.S. Embassy in West Beirut, killing dozens of American Foreign Service workers and Lebanese citizens. Although the notion of using a car or a truck to deliver explosives to a target was not a new one, the suicide bombing of the U.S. Embassy represented a sea change in tactics for militia groups and terrorist organizations in the Middle East. And there are the peacekeepers, or the people who are supposed to be the peacekeepers in the Lebanese civil war. Israel and Lebanon signed a formal peace agreement following that month that called for the withdrawal of Israeli troops contingent upon Syria's withdrawal. Syria opposed the agreement, however, and refused to retreat. In July, Israeli troops began a unilateral withdrawal from positions within Lebanon. They had been there since June of 1982. Fighting between competing militias escalated in the wake of the Israeli withdrawal, and violence against the multinational force increased. So, nuclear war, right? We talked about one nuclear war probability, which Petrov decided wasn't a real possibility. Here's another one. According to declassified documents revealed just 2 years ago, 2021, in November 1983, at the height of Cold War tensions, the United States and the Soviet Union came very close to nuclear war. The documents focused on a massive military training exercise known as Able Archer, in which NATO simulated the transition from conventional to nuclear conflict in the event of war in Europe. Top Soviet leaders thought that the war game was real, that the US and NATO really were about to launch a nuclear first strike against the USSR, and top Soviet military commanders took steps to retaliate. And here is one of the heroes who may have saved the world from a nuclear holocaust. His name is Lieutenant General Leonid Perutz. The commander of the Soviet Fourth Army Forces in Eastern Europe ordered all of his units to make preparations for the immediate use of nuclear weapons. As part of that order, crewmen loaded actual nuclear bombs onto several combat planes. Perutz, the intelligence chief for the U.S. Armed Forces in Europe, saw the Soviet moves and stopped what might have otherwise been a deadly escalation. After Able Archer and the thousands of American troops flew home, the Soviets unloaded their bombs, canceled their nuclear alert as well. So 1983 could have been a rather interesting year in terms of nuclear war. Grenada, that is, I laugh a little bit at that, but that is where the Grenadian government was overthrown. I was on a cruise ship about 6 years ago. I spoke on cruise ships before COVID. And we stopped in Grenada and we went to a beach. And there was a guy with a guitar and he starts serenading my wife $1 a song. So after about 3 songs, okay, we've had enough. And he had his $3, but we started talking. And he was talking about the U.S. invasion of Grenada in the day and night that the Grenada government was overthrown by Cuban operatives. And he said he's out at the beach. I guess that's where he hangs out all the time, or hung out all the time. Anyway, he's at the beach and he sees fireworks over the Capitol. And he and his buddies say, hey, you know what? There's some sort of party over there. Maybe we should go over there and see what's going on, have a good time, do whatever they're going to do. So he starts heading from the beach and he's going in the direction of where he thinks the fireworks are going off. And there are people running the other way, bleeding, telling, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? They're overthrowing the government up there. Get away, get away, get away. And well, he went a little more, he saw some more people all bloodied and limping, and then he decided to go back to the beach because, yeah, it was the government being overthrown. It's October 25th, President Ronald Reagan, citing the threat posed to American nationals on the Caribbean island of Grenada by the nation's Marxist regime, orders U.S. forces to invade and secure their safety. There were about 1,000 Americans there at the time, many of them students at the island's medical school. In a little more than a week, the Grenada government was overthrown, and the Cuban exiles, they weren't exiles, they were operatives, who pulled this off, basically ran into homes, guns blazing, saying, give us your clothes, so they could blend in to the locals there. And of course, if you're defenseless, you're going to give in to these guys, which they did. The situation on Grenada had been a concern to American officials since 1979, when the leftist Maurice Bishop seized power and began to develop close relations with Cuba. In 1983, another Marxist, Bernard Cord, had Bishop assassinated and took control of the government. This led to the formation of a revolutionary military council with Hudson Austin, another Marxist, as its chairman. Protesters clashed with the new government while the violence escalated. And that's sort of a museum now. That's where a lot of things took place up on top of the hill in Grenada. Reagan ordered 2,000 U.S. troops into the island, where they soon found themselves facing opposition from the Grenada Armed Forces and groups of Cuban military engineers in Grenada to repair and expand the island's airport. Reagan ordered more troops in. And by the time the fighting was done, the combined forces of the U.S. and Jamaica totaled nearly 7,600 troops. Nearly 20 of those troops were killed, over 100 wounded, over 60 Grenada and Cuban troops were killed. Cord's government collapsed. It was replaced by Governor General Paul Scoon, who was acceptable to the United States. American troops were withdrawn in December. There is the American embassy in Kuwait that was bombed. It was bombed on December 12th again. The American embassy in Kuwait is hit by a truck loaded with plastic explosives. The detonation does not go as planned, but 5 people are killed. Within the same hour, 5 other explosions are also attempted. Targets included French embassy, oil refinery, control tower at the Kuwait airport, as well as water and petrochemical plants. Though the bombs explode, few people are injured as the bombs fail to detonate properly. So you get problems with Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Kuwait, as well as Iran and Iraq in the Middle East. Speaking of that, there's Donald Rumsfeld glad-handing Saddam Hussein, who at this point, well, he's the enemy of my enemy, so I guess that makes him my friend. Is that what it is? I'm not sure. Rumsfeld visited Baghdad December 20th as the high-level presidential envoy of Ronald Reagan. Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein. Iraq was at war with Iran. Washington wanted Iraq's friendship to box in Iran. The war started by Iraq in 1980 was going Iran's way. On November 26th, the National Security Decision Directive 114 stated the American policy. The U.S. wanted to project its military force in the Gulf and protect oil supplies. Saddam could help Reagan and Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld kind of overlooked Iraq's use of chemical weapons and some human rights abuses. But hey, look, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Or something like that. Arafat leaves Lebanon. Yasser Arafat. It's December 20th, and the PLO chairman, Yasser Arafat, evacuates Lebanon with 4,000 loyalists. They were expected to go to North Yemen and Tunisia. Arafat ended up in Egypt briefly, which leads me to a story about Arafat and a guy I know by the name of Robert Owen Friedman. He's written a whole bunch of books about the Middle East, joined the U.S. Army in 1965. I always believed that he was CIA. He must have been CIA at some point. He became an advisor to Israeli prime ministers and once met with Arafat in Tunis. And he was telling me about the time he met with Arafat, that he goes to the office and he's there at the appointed time, and Arafat's late. And he's late. He comes in about 3 hours later. And he looks at my friend, Bob Friedman. He looks at him and says, Friedman, right? Yeah. Kosher food's over there. Get some food. We'll sit down. We'll talk. And Friedman says to Arafat, he says, I didn't like that speech you just gave. I just didn't like it. Oh, yeah, forget about it. I got to tell them what they need to be told, and, just to keep things going here. How's the food? And that was the initial meeting between my friend, Bob Friedman, and Yasser Arafat in Tunisia, probably about 35 years ago, maybe a little more. Margaret Thatcher wins big in the UK, and there's Margaret Thatcher and her best friend on the world stage, Ronald Reagan. The United Kingdom general election was held on June 9th. It gave the Conservative Party under the leadership of Margaret Thatcher the most decisive victory since the Labour Party in 1945, when Clement Attlee and his government came in, kicking out Winston Churchill. And that was with a landslide majority of 144 seats. Thatcher was in trouble throughout her first term. Unemployment increased during the first 3 years of her premiership, and the economy went through a recession. However, the British victory in the Falklands War in 1982 led to the recovery of her personal popularity, and some economic growth began to resume. She was a war hero. This is about American education, and I'm not sure in the 40 years much has changed. But the Reagan administration wanted to know why America had educational woes, and they set up a blue ribbon committee to find this out. It's April 26, and members of the National Commission on Excellence in Education walked into the White House with a report for President Ronald Reagan called A Nation at Risk. It was not a glowing paper. It said, our nation is at risk. Our once unchallenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technology innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. Uh, the WOES, International Comparisons of Student Achievement, completed a decade ago, 1973, which, by the way, was the year I graduated high school. That was a year ahead. I should have graduated in 74, but I graduated in 73. Revealed that on 19 academic tests, American students were never first or second, and in comparison with other industrialized nations, were last 7 times. Some 23 million American adults are functionally illiterate by the simplest test of everyday reading, writing, and comprehension. About 13% of all 17-year-olds in the United States can be considered functionally illiterate. Functional illiteracy among minority youth may run as high as 40%. And that was given to Reagan, and nothing came of it. Oh, a book came out of it. There you go. A Nation at Risk. The long list of recommendations to improve public schools included the adoption of rigorous standards, state and local tests to measure achievement, stronger graduation standards, sufficient financial resources, and curriculum changes to give students a solid grounding in basic subjects as well as art and computer science. Abortion rights. Well, it's 10 years at this point since Roe versus Wade, and the anti-abortion groups are out there trying to get that thing overturned. On June 15th, the Supreme Court of the United States reaffirmed the constitutional right to obtain an abortion and struck down an array of local legislative restrictions on access to abortions. In the most sweeping of the 3 decisions, the court declared unconstitutional an Akron, Ohio ordinance that placed a number of obstacles in the path of access to abortion. Back in following the bombing of Pearl Harbor back in December 1941, December 7th, 1941, both the United States and Canada decided we better round up all the Japanese on the Pacific coast, whether it was north of the border or south of the border, put them into kind of camps. They're not quite concentration camps, but they're camps. On February 24th, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, created by U.S. Congress, declares that the internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War was unjust. It recommended that the detainees receive $20,000 in compensation. When you consider that all of their property and all their land were taken away, and then 40 years later they get $20,000, might not be enough. Oh, that thing is kind of erupting. Kilauea in Hawaii, as you look at it behind my right shoulder. The most recent eruption streak started January 3rd, 1983, when lava broke out of fissures east of the summit. The lava foundations would eventually form a cone now called Pu'o. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is signed into law by Ronald Reagan. And there's Coretta Scott King, and it is 15 years after King's assassination. It's November 20th, and Reagan signed it into law. It would be a celebration and a holiday which would start in January 1986. The call for a national holiday to honor Dr. King's legacy began soon after his assassination in Memphis at the Lorraine Hotel on April 4th, 1968. U.S. Representative, the Michigan Democrat John Conyers, introduced legislation to establish the holiday just 4 days after King was killed. That would be April 8th, 1968, but Congress took no action on the bill. A bill to establish the holiday successfully passed through both houses of Congress in 1983. This plane caught fire. It caught fire. It is June 2nd. The fire broke out in the toilet of Air Canada Flight 797 carrying 41 passengers and 5 crew members. The plane was on the way from Dallas-Fort Worth to Toronto. When the fire began, it landed at the Greater Cincinnati Airport, but the fire did kill 23 people. As a result of this tragedy, the Aviation Authority ruled that all passenger jets should be fitted with smoke detectors, track lighting on the floor of the cabin, fire extinguishers, and that all flight crew be trained in fire safety. It also ordered that materials to make seats within an aircraft be made of a more flame retardant material. Sally Ride takes a ride. She is the third woman astronaut. The Soviets had two women in space before Sally Ride. The USSR cosmonauts Valentina Tereshkova and Svetlana Savakaya, 1963 and 1982, were the two first women in space. Ride was one of 35 astronauts selected in 1978. She was in a group of Americans slated for space flight, and that was the first time it included women in minority. She and 5 other women were chosen out of 8,000 applicants. The class dubbed themselves, even though they were women, the 35 New Guys. 30 guys and 5 women. Ride was the first of 4 New Guys launched into orbit when she was a member of Challenger's STS-7 crew, which lifted off on June 18th. And there were the usual dumb questions from the media, which was at that time commonplace for women and African Americans. That's the 1980s, like Doug Williams, who was the Washington quarterback during one of the Super Bowls that Joe Gibbs led them to back in the early 80s. And he was asked, well, how long have you been an African American quarterback? And which would be his whole life. But hey, dumb questions are dumb questions. Upon being asked if she wept when frustrated, Ride laughed and said, why don't you ask STS-7 pilot Rick Houck these questions? Julian Bluford was the first African American in space. He was aboard STS-8 on a rainy August 30th morning. He soared into space, another one of the 35 New Guys. Poor Pluto. Pluto used to be a planet, you know. It's not a planet anymore. They decommissioned it. It's a dwarf planet. It's like being drummed out of, I don't know, drummed out of somewhere, right? Oh, still a planet in 1983. Yeah, Pluto was still a planet in 1983. Pioneer 10, an artist's rendition, going by Pluto. It's April 25th, the first unmanned spacecraft, Pioneer 10, crosses the orbit of Pluto, making it the first craft to go beyond our solar system. Pioneer 10 was launched on March 3rd, 1972. So if any of you have any plans to go to Pluto, it may take you 11 years and a month to get there. Just in case you're thinking of it. Between July 15th, 1972 and February 15th, 1973, it became the first spacecraft to traverse the asteroid belt. Photography of Jupiter began on November 6, 1973. The craft completed the first mission to Jupiter, and then, hey, what's the old Frank Sinatra song, Fly Me to the Moon? Let Me Play Among the Stars. Let's find out what life's like on Jupiter and Mars. Hey, you could have done that. Frank could have done that. Vanessa Williams, there she is, Miss America. Remember when Burt Parks was fired as the MC of, or the host of the Miss America pageant, and Johnny Carson basically went on a campaign to get Burt Parks back on the show? Never did. I think Gary Collins took over for Burt Parks. Well, regardless, Vanessa Williams, Miss America. On September 17th, 20-year-old Vanessa Williams, who didn't live too far from where I do right now, about 18 miles away, becomes the first African-American woman ever to win the Miss America crown. During the first 30 years of the Atlantic City pageant, African-American women weren't even allowed to become contestants. MASH ends. Goodbye, Hawkeye. Goodbye. It ended with the biggest audience ever to watch a TV show at the time. Goodbye, farewell, amen. The final episode of MASH aired on February 28th, the most watched program in television history. 105 million Americans watched the 90-minute finale. MASH began live on CBS in 1972. It was developed by Larry Gelbart. It was part of that group with Your Show of Shows, with Imogene Coca and Sid Caesar. Some of the writers on that show include some guy named Melvin Kaminsky. I think he changed his name to Mel Brooks. I don't know what happened to him. Carl Reiner, Woody Allen, and a whole bunch of people who were on that show. Neil Simon, Danny Simon. Anyway, Gelbart basically took the movie and developed a spin-off series. And the movie was based on Richard Hooker's 1968 novel MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors. Co-written and directed by the MASH star, Ellen Alda, the episode covers the Korean War ceasefire, the dismantling of the 4077 MASH unit, and dispersal of the show's characters as they travel home from war. Alda's character, Hawkeye Pierce, has a mental breakdown. His best friend, BJ Honeycutt, gets sent home. Klinger, who has spent the entire series trying to convince his superiors he's insane, cross-dresses, so he could leave, decides to stay in Korea indefinitely. By the way, Jamie Farr claimed that he based part of that character on Lenny Bruce, who tried to get out of the military by cross-dressing. Michael Jackson does the moonwalk. The moonwalk. He's performing his new song, Billie Jean, on May 16th. He's taking part in a TV program called Motown 25. Yesterday, Today, Forever, filmed to celebrate the record's greatest artist, Don Minshew, and the executive producer, Susan DePasse, banned everyone, including Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross, from performing new music. But nobody bothered to tell Michael Jackson, or if they did, he didn't listen. And he was determined to perform a new song called Billie Jean. Michael Jackson won the battle. Madonna, who is now on tour. She's out on tour now. There is Madonna, and this is a Boston story too. In a second, I'll get to it. She becomes prominent in 1983. Now, here's the Boston story. It's a guy by the name of Gary LaForest, and I was supposed to work with Gary on a magazine called The New Frontier that Helen O'Donnell was putting together. Helen O'Donnell was the daughter of JFK's chief of staff, Kenny O'Donnell, and she was going to put out a magazine and a TV show, which I was going to be involved in, but it fell apart. The whole deal fell apart. But the guy who I dealt with most was Gary LaForest, and he was around the studio where Madonna was recording in Boston back around 1982, 1983. And he said her voice didn't even register initially on the VU meter, which measures the volume. And they had to do the Les Paul Mary Ford thing and layer and layer and layer and layer and layer her voice till it got something on the tape. Anyway, but everybody knew she was going to be a star because she had the look. She had the look. She may not have had the voice, but she had the look, and she had the songs that would be appealing to teenage girls. Madonna and an old boyfriend by the name of Steve Bray wrote some songs together. She came up with the song Everybody, which became her first demo. After shopping the song around for a while, Sire Records agreed to give Madonna her first record deal in 1982. 1983, that record came out. It was a self-titled album named Madonna. The third single on the album, Holiday, was released September 7th and landed in the Billboard Top 20. Karen Carpenter passed away on February 4th. She was the singer and drummer of the Carpenters. She died from complications caused by an eating disorder, anorexia nervosa. She was 32. The Carpenters, Karen and Richard, the Carpenters was the biggest selling group of the 1970s. No fewer than 10 of their singles went on to become million sellers, helped out a lot by Herb Alpert. He had the label. Oh, Cabbage Patch Obsession. How many of you had to go out there and get Cabbage Patch for your kids? See, my kid she was born in June, so she's only five months old, so she didn't know about it. That's True Value Hardware. They were selling Cabbage Patch dolls. True Value Hardware. And I'm a member of the True Value Hardware Club. I got my card where I could get in there and get 10% off something if I ever go there. In 1976, Xavier Roberts met with Martha Nelson Thomas at a craft fair. He asked her to supply him with dolls to sell in Georgia, where he lived and worked. Thomas briefly let him sell her doll babies, but stopped. Thomas sued Roberts and won an undisclosed amount after the case was settled out of court. Roberts created his own version in 1978. In 1982, he licensed the dolls to Coleco for mass production under the name Cabbage Patch Kids. Cabbage Patch Kids weren't cute. They were not cute. They didn't talk, They then went to bed. They didn't do anything, actually. But each doll had a unique name adoption papers and a birth certificate. The demand exceeded the supply. Starting on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving in the United States, remember Thanksgiving in Canada is what's Columbus Day here, people wanted to get the scarce dolls, which led to in-store scuffles and a frenzy resale market. I did this talk recently and a woman was telling me, oh yeah, I punched somebody out. I wanted to get the doll. She did. By the end of the year, almost 3 million of the Cabbage Patch Kids toys were sold. Mario Brothers game debuts. It was released by Nintendo, the arcade game in Japan on July 14th. The Mario Brothers game featured Mario and his brother Luigi, two plumbers who battle sewer creatures in New York. Good luck to you. Oh, not just, anyway, it was successful, but it wasn't initially successful. It's kind of stupid. Two guys, two plumbers, going into the sewers of Manhattan and Queens and the Bronx and Brooklyn, Staten Island. It doesn't make any sense. But eventually they prevailed. Fraggle Rock. Some of you kids may have watched Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock. On January 10th, Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock debuted. It was designed to entertain while encouraging an understanding and embracing of diversity. There were 96 episodes, 100 original songs. The Fraggle gang included Red, Gobo, Wembley, Boober, Moki, and Uncle Traveling Matt. The show featured a unique mix of music that included a number of genres from folk, blues, gospel to country and rock. I don't remember the show. I do not remember it, but I had kids in 1983, 1985, so I know they watched the show. Never watched it with them, but I remember the name Fraggle Rock. Hello, cellular telephones. Hey, guess what? Look, you could have had one of, well, maybe not one of these, but one of those in 1983. October 13th, David B. Meehan placed the first commercially wireless call on a Dynatec from his 1983 Mercedes-Benz 380 SL to Bob Barnett, the former president of Ameritech Mobile Communications, who then placed a call on the Dynatec from inside a Chrysler convertible to the grandson of Alexander Graham Bell, who was in Germany for the event. This is pretty pricey, right? This is pricey. But if you wanted one of those versions, the Dynatec, the retail price was $3,995, and that probably now, I don't know, about $10,000, $11,000 in today's money. Goodbye hand crank telephone. Up in Maine, the last hand crank telephone was put to rest. It's October 12th. Bryant Park, Maine residents crowded a switchboard in Eldon Hathaway's living room and cheered as the last hand crank telephone system in the country was disconnected. With a tug on the few wires after 2 p.m., Mr. Hathaway and two officials from the Bryant Pond Telephone Company converted all local telephones to dial service. Computers. On January 1st, the internet takes another step towards its creation as ARPANET. The Advanced Research Projects Agency Network is moved to TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol. Microsoft announces Word, originally called Multi-Tool Word. Let's try that again, Multi-Tool World. In the marketing blitz, Microsoft distributed 450,000 disks containing a demonstration version of its Word program in the November issue of PC World magazine, giving readers a chance to try the program for free. CD players, they lasted long, didn't they? Well, maybe not. CD players didn't last too long, nor did the VHS. VHS actually lasted less, and some of them are still around. March 2nd, though they were already available in Japan and Europe, Sony and Philips released their CD players in America. Though a compact disc player cost over $1,000, they proved to be extremely popular. United States Football League starts. There is Herschel Walker, who played with the New Jersey Generals. The United States Football League started life at a swanky New York hotel on May 11th, 1982, and I was there that day when it started, and Dave Dixon was there. With the start, and Dave Dixon was the guy who was behind the league, with the start of the play in February 1983. The league had franchises in Arizona and Tempe, Birmingham, Boston, Chicago, Denver, Detroit, Pontiac, Los Angeles, New Jersey, East Rutherford, Oakland, Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, Tampa, and Washington. Had a 2-year TV deal with ABC and also ESPN, and the national radio contract with ABC, and would play its games in the spring. Donald Trump would enter the USFL in 1983. He was originally, and I was at that news conference, and one of those microphones, I think the one with the on the left side under Channel 9 there is my microphone. I'm pretty sure of that, since it had a windscreen on it. None of the others had windscreens, and I had windscreens. Anyway, he was offered the chance to join the United States Football League in 1982. All he had to do was come up with $2 million. He didn't have it. Claimed that was all tied up into the building of Trump Towers. He did have money to buy the team in, I think it was September 1983, from Walter Duncan. And by the time he got into the league was wobbly. Let's put it that way, wobbly, because the original set of owners had no idea what they were doing. The league was beset with financial problems. Owners spent too much money on players. Based on attendance and TV, there was some appetite for spring football. Trump would purchase the New Jersey Generals on September 22nd, steer the league in a different direction after purchasing the franchise. Oh, this was a bigamist. His name, Giovanni Vigolito. Giovanni Vigolito. On February 11th, he's convicted and sentenced to 34 years in prison for fraud and bigamy. He was fined $336,000. He claimed he married 105 women. Must have had a lot of stamina, right? Would marry them, convince them to sell their homes, and then disappear with all their belongings, which he would sell at flea markets. He married Patricia Ann Gardner of Mesa, Arizona in 1981, while still married to Sharon Clark of Fremont, Indiana. Gardner testified that he left 3 weeks later with $43,000 of her money. She had her husband tracked down and arrested in Florida. Clark also testified at the trial, saying he fled with about $49,000 belonging to her. Authorities confirmed at least 82 marriages in 9 states, Canada, Britain, Italy, and Hong Kong. Hey, when you go out with somebody, don't you ask about their background? The 1983 legacy. There is Ronald Reagan. There is Yuri Andropov. The Strategic Defense Initiative Organization was set up in 1984 within the U.S. Department of Defense to oversee development of Reagan's Star Wars idea. It would be eliminated in 1993 by the Clinton administration. It went nowhere. Within 4 months of the Beirut barracks bombings, elements of the multinational force began to withdraw to ships offshore on February 26, 1984. The last U.S. Marines left Beirut, Lebanon that day. Soviet Union would fall in 1991. Nuclear weapons are still a global problem. Donald Rumsfeld's second visit soon after, in March 1984, cemented the U.S.-Iraq relationship. The Iran-Iraq War ended in 1988. The U.S. would be at war with Iraq in 1989 and again in 2003. Rumsfeld would be part of the Bush administration that made the policy to invade Iraq in 2003. Saddam would be executed in 2006. Abortion remains a contentious issue among politicians and activists in the United States. The United States Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade on June 24th, 2022. That decision drew worldwide, it was condemned worldwide. The Middle East remains a hotspot. Grenada is a poor country, but a tourist haven. Oh, poor Pluto. Poor Pluto. Samantha Smith died in a plane crash at the age of 13 in 1985. Mikhail Gorbachev sent his condolences to the family, saying that everyone in the Soviet Union who knew Samantha Smith will forever remember the image of the American girl who, like millions of young Soviet men, who was like millions of young Soviet men and women. Bluford would fly 3 more missions as a mission specialist aboard NASA space shuttles. The legacy, Dr. Sally rides on back of a quarter. She was part of one more space mission in 1984, a flight that saw the first American woman to walk in space, Kathy Sullivan. In 2022, Dr. Sally Ride was honored, having her image on the back of a quarter for being a physicist and the first American woman in space. Radio communications were lost with Pioneer 10 on January 23rd, 2003, because of the loss of electronic power for its radio transmitter, with the probe at a distance of about 7.5 billion miles from Earth. Pluto is no longer a planet. In August 2006, the International Astronomical Union downgraded the status of Pluto to that of a dwarf planet. Seems that Pluto had some problems with its neighbors. Its neighbors complained. Somebody complained for them. Pluto has not cleared out of its neighborhood. Pluto, which shares an orbital neighborhood with the Kuiper Belt objects such as the Plutinos. I guess the Plutinos don't like the Pluto, I don't know, but it's no longer a planet. Very few of the 1983 Education Commission's recommendations were enacted. Instead, politicians tried to shape schools politically, not with education in mind. In 1992, Arizona voters approved the celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day after the National Football League said Tempe would get the 1996 Super Bowl. Arizona voters said yes, the NFL pulled the 1993 Super Bowl out of Tempe in 1990 after Arizona voters said no to MLK Day. Kilauea is still erupting. Oh, Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers. That thing makes money. That makes a lot of money. According to Billboard, Madonna is the most successful solo artist in Hot 100 chart history, second overall to the Beatles, and the most successful dance club artist of all time. The Cabbage Patch Kids toys is the most successful new doll introduction in the history of the toy industry. The Mario Brothers went on to be highly successful in American arcades. A Super Mario Brothers movie was released in 1986. The game is still popular. In a 2020 updated list by Rolling Stone, Michael Jackson's Thriller was ranked number 12 of all-time songs. It was ranked by the National Association of Recording Merchandisers in conjunction with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at number 3 on its list of the definitive 200 albums of all time. Beat It and Billie Jean King were both included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. Vanessa Williams resigned as Miss America on July 23, 1984, after nude pictures of her appeared in Penthouse. She's still out there. She's had a successful showbiz career. The 2010 Super Bowl was the most watched program in U.S. TV history, overtaking the 27-year-old record set by the final episode of the Korean War comedy, MASH. Fraggle Rock, Back to the Rock, was revived in January 2022 with new episodes 35 years after it ended its 1980s run. On February 2nd, 1991, Giovanni Vigoletto died of a brain hemorrhage at 61, serving prison time for bigamy. Donald Trump became the president of the United States. Herschel Walker ran for Senate in the state of Washington. The United States Football League folded in 1986 after a jury awarded the business $1 in damages after deciding the National Football League did indeed violate antitrust laws in trying to drive the USFL out of business. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected the 45th president of the United States. In 2020, Trump was defeated by Joe Biden. Herschel Walker lost his bid to become the United States Senator from Georgia, also in 2020. The United States Football League's name was used again in another spring football league starting in 2022. And there I am, and I am doing an interview. It's like I needed a shave that day. I always had a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, but there I am. I'm interviewing Lanny McDonald, who was with Calgary at that point, National Hockey League, who had the greatest mustache in National Hockey League history. But there I am, wow, 27 years old at that point. Anyway, So thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? It is your turn to talk. Go ahead. If you have anything.
Well, thank you very much. Wow.
Remember
Yes,
it?
thank you. Appreciate it.
So you remember it. So anyway, so thank you very much. And we'll see you in October, Italian American Month. And have a great day. Have a great rest of the summer. And we'll see you in the fall. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
You. Bye.